So I'm in this doctor's office in student health. As you can imagine, it's a very sterile environment, fluorescent lights, laying on the bed, very cold, very uncomfortable.
The patient lying on this cold, uncomfortable bed is Elle Murata, and she's about to have an ultrasound.
I am a sixth-year PhD student at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I am studying neuroscience and women's health. My feet are in those stirrups, and I don't really know what's going on. You're kind of staring up at the ceiling, and you kind of hear people talking next to you. You can't really see the screen that they're looking at. And so they were more so interacting amongst themselves rather than openly communicating with me about what was happening, which made it scarier for myself. I'm sort of on the verge of like, what's happening with my body? Am I getting diagnosed with this chronic disorder? Thinking about all those things while they're looking at my physiology. And basically, I just hear the doctor mutter like, oh yeah, like, you're right, you have PCOS, basically confirming that she sees this sort of characteristic morphology on the screen.
PCOS is polycystic ovary syndrome, and the doctor agreeing that Elle had PCOS is a big win for her. Elle had to fight to even have this ultrasound in the first place. But now that it's over and the condition has been diagnosed, it's not clear what should happen next.
Very quickly packed it up and was kind of leaving. I didn't really get any follow-up, but I was like, wait, what am I supposed to do next?
The doctor's answer is short.
Just go back on birth control.
Elle left that ultrasound feeling dismissed and upset and questioning herself, not just as a patient, but as a women's health researcher.
The irony was definitely not lost on me at the time. This experience is not unique, and that's why we're here. That's why you have this podcast. It's not unique. But I think the unique part of my situation was that I am someone who's researching this.
Elle's dissertation is focused on endocrine disruption in the brain. So when she asked this question,
wait, what am I supposed to do next?
She decided to answer it for herself, and she embarked on a project to fill a knowledge gap about PCOS and the brain.
I'm a neuroscientist, realized how little we know about PCOS and the brain, even though it's this systemic neuroendocrine disorder that is associated with greater mental health burden, anxiety, depression.
This is Overlooked, and I'm Golda Arthur. PCOS affects about 1 in 10 women of reproductive age worldwide, but most of us don't even know we have it. It's characterized by irregular or absent menstrual cycles, high levels of androgen hormones like testosterone, acne, or excessive facial hair. And for what's considered a common condition, we still don't know what causes it. And if you're listening to this show, that probably doesn't surprise you. But this episode isn't just about what we don't know. It's about what happens when the person who doesn't get answers decides to find them for herself. After Elle Murata was diagnosed and dismissed by her doctor, she decided to do something. She turned herself into a research subject to learn more about PCOS and the brain.
At that point, I was like, okay, I want to do this study. I want to study myself because I know I'll show up and I'll be a good patient.
Okay, so I'm changing into my scrubs. Just gotta make sure all my jewelry is off for the MRI. And I'm about to go get my brain scanned, so let's go.
My conversation with Elle Murata about PCOS is coming up in just a minute. Our health impacts the way we move through the world. The stories you hear on Overlooked illustrate this so well. I hear from listeners all the time who tell me the show helped them understand their own health in a new way or give them language for something they'd been experiencing. The idea that this podcast could help someone be bolder in their self-advocacy is important to me. So I'm creating a storytelling workshop called First Person Health. Craft, record, and produce your own powerful health narrative. Take a look at our show notes to learn more about the workshop and to sign up. Elle, welcome to Overlooked. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Of course, I'm so happy to be here.
You are collecting all kinds of data on your body. Tell me about this decision to start collecting all this information about yourself, where did that come from?
So I am in a lab that studies women's health and the brain. And so I'm already in this environment that's looking at that. In our lab, I would say we're more historically have been more interested in normative hormone rhythms in the brain. So there had been this big study in my lab where someone scanned herself every day across a complete menstrual cycle. This is becoming a very common method in neuroscience, is to basically have a small number of individuals come in at multiple time points and track their physiology in their brain. And this is really good for something like the endocrine system because your hormones are changing so quickly. So having many, many visits and many, many scans allows you to capture that within sort of person change. I was inspired by that. And I was like, okay, we kind of have this tracked over people who have normal cycles. And so basically, while I was getting this diagnosis in my second year of the PhD, I was like, I should just do this to myself because what's going on up here? Like, what's happening? Because I have irregular menstrual cycles, irregular endocrine rhythms. Why don't we characterize this in someone who has like a disrupted endocrine rhythm? So what I'm doing now, my now friend and colleague, Dr. Erin Christensen, who's also a neuroscientist with PCOS, also had this idea to do it to herself. And she reached out to us and was like, hey, I really want to do this. We should collaborate. And then basically we went from there. What we're doing in this study that we're calling PCOS and Us is two of us with PCOS. We scanned ourselves over the course of 6 weeks.
Okay, so I'm changing into my scrubs, just gotta make sure all of my jewelry's off for the MRI, and I'm about to go get my brain scanned, so let's go.
So basically, what we're trying to do is just characterize what's happening to our bodies and brains over at least one complete cycle in individuals with PCOS.
And so list out for me the kind of data that you're collecting, right?
Yes. We are getting saliva samples to get testosterone.
Okay, so I got about 3.5 milliliters of saliva, which is pretty typical. So now I'm gonna put that in the freezer.
We are getting urine samples to get some hormone levels.
Oh my goodness, it's a little after 6 a.m. and I'm doing my first urine test of the day.
We are collecting a blood draw.
Last one.
Last one, I'm so excited. Oh, finally.
We are collecting cognitive data. So we have tasks of sustained attention, visuospatial learning, verbal fluency. We are doing daily questionnaires because it's important to measure daily levels of sleep, stress.
It is about 9 a.m., which is when I start the questionnaires and cognitive part of my day. So I'm putting my phone on Do Not Disturb, and I'm about to do some fun cognitive tests.
We are also doing a lot of passive measures like heart rate variability, sleep quality, activity levels. We are getting fasted and unfasted glucose levels because often glucose metabolism is dysregulated in PCOS.
Find a spot that isn't too pricked up. Okay. Good. Right. At the beginning of the study, it was totally fine and it wasn't a problem. And now I'll just like look down and there's like blood all over the back of like my binder, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I should use Band-Aids. So now gotta eat my set bagel breakfast.
And then we are also getting an hour's worth of brain scans. So brain structure measures and brain function measures.
Okay, just ended my scan and I'm gonna go put on my Oura ring and my Garmin watch again and then have a normal rest of my Saturday. It's 12:30.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
Yes. Yes, it is a lot, but it is important data that I think would otherwise not be collected.
Yeah.
It's definitely a pilot study because it's just two of us, and we scanned ourselves over 6 weeks, and the scans were every other day. So we are hoping that this is sort of the basis for studies to come. We can look at this data and be like, okay, these are the patterns that are starting to emerge. How do we apply this to bigger cohort studies? Another thing we know in the tiny, tiny literature of PCOS in the brain is that often cognitive performance is lower or disrupted in individuals with PCOS, but it's usually just looking at one time point and comparing people with and without PCOS. So really, we're just trying to deeply phenotype what is happening across all of these different systems in the body and how are they related to each other, because I think that goes back to sort of the overlooked part of this is that we never approach it as the systemic disorder that it is.
As you talk about it, I've never, for example, thought about PCOS and cognition before. And that's like a little bit of an eye opener to me.
Yes, definitely. Because we know so little about it, but what we do know is sort of siloed. And I think this is a case with a lot of women's health, right? There aren't a lot of people who look at the whole thing together. It's people who can kind of look at different angles of it, like fertility, metabolism, cardiac health. But for me as a neuroscientist, I'm also biased. And I'm like, why hasn't anyone looked at the neural effects of this? Greater anxiety and depression are very replicated patterns in PCOS individuals. And we don't really know what that looks like in the brain.
Elle, to what extent does your personal experience with PCOS drive or influence your work?
I feel like a lot of people have these experiences and then they're motivated to do the work. But I was just starting graduate school, already interested in this, already like mad about the, blindness to female biology. And then I got this on top of it. So then I was like, okay, I feel like it was a little bit amplified. My focus for my other part of my PhD has been endometriosis. And I think it's very similar. It's also a very overlooked disorder that is just as common, if not more common, that we know nothing about. And so I feel like those things together really keep me motivated. A lot of times in research, when we're designing studies, we don't often talk to the patient population that we're looking at. And so when you look at the studies, you can kind of tell because there are a lot of things that you experience as a patient that might be messy or hard to deal with as a researcher in data. But I think it's really important to capture, again, like the nuance of what it means to be someone with PCOS and how you can translate that to a study to understand more about the disorder.
And I want to illustrate this by hearing a little bit more about your story, Elle. When did PCOS first show up in your life?
I was just starting grad school as this PhD student in neuroendocrinology, and I went off of birth control for the first time, basically ever. I had been on birth control from age 15, 16 until age 25, 26. And I went off of birth control and I didn't get my period for 6 months. And I knew that that was not normal. I think usually they say once you go off birth control, of course, it's going to be irregular at first, but it should be about 3 to 4 months, and 6 months was excessive. So I basically was like, okay, I'm in endocrinology research. What's going on with my hormones? Why am I not getting a period? So I go to the doctors. I asked for an endocrine panel. That was pretty easy to get. I immediately sort of put on my scientist hat when I got the results. I'm like, okay, digging in, like what is going on here? And I notice immediately that my testosterone levels are like off the charts. It's like, okay, that's interesting. I knew that often people get an ultrasound to look at sort of the other parts of this disorder. And so I was like, okay, that's going to be my next step. So I spend like weeks researching this. I'm going through all the empirical papers, like figuring out what might be going on, kind of freaking out, but I don't have my diagnosis yet. So I'm kind of still in that stage. But I'm like, okay, I'm going to make an appointment with the OBGYN at my student health and, they'll give me an ultrasound and it'll be great and I'll know what to do next. I come very prepared, I think, as a patient. I'm like, this is going to be great. Like, I'm just going to tell them what I need and I'm going to get it and I'm going to go. So I show up to the OBGYN and I basically explain sort of my profile. I sort of make my argument that I think I probably have PCOS. And okay, the next step is, can I get an ultrasound? And it was met with reluctance and apathy, I would say. And I didn't expect that at all. So I think I was very thrown off too. I'm someone who knows more than the average person about endocrinology, and I felt like very sort of empowered, but like it was really crazy to me how quickly that shifted in the patient room. immediately it's just like, you're a grad student. It's probably just stress. That's why you're not getting your periods. It was very difficult to get any of my point across at all. Like, it was kind of like the decision had been made before the doctor even walked into the room, which was really upsetting. So I kind of immediately switched gears into being like, okay, I'm a novice. I know nothing about my own body. I know nothing about hormones. It was hard not to get emotional. The one thing I wanted was to get an ultrasound. So I stood my ground on that and pushed really hard to get that. And it was hard to get a yes, but she reluctantly was like, okay, if you really want one, you can get one. I left feeling like I didn't know anything about my body. Maybe I didn't know anything about hormones. So I was really questioning myself in terms of, not only my identity as like a patient, an individual, but also a researcher.
I want to ask you a follow-up question on something you just said. You said it got emotional. Why did it get emotional?
I feel like I had kind of steeled myself a little bit already after doing all this research to know that I was probably going to be diagnosed with this chronic disorder. So I was like, okay, but I want to know next, like, how do I adjust that? But then I felt like I was kind of going backwards and it's like, well, you don't even have that. It's just stress. And I'm like, I know I'm stressed, but let's just try and see if it might be something else. So I feel like it kind of made me question myself. I'm like, maybe I don't know what's going on with my own body. And I think one of the things too that made it a little bit difficult, and I think is part of the overlooked nuances of PCOS, is that there are a lot of different phenotypes. And because I didn't show the more typically understood physical characteristics, like I didn't have a lot of that hair growth, I didn't have a lot of that acne, it seemed like it could just be brushed off as like, oh, maybe it's not that. You're not really showing a lot of the signs that people think of when they think of PCOS. And so I kind of got in my head about it and was like almost convinced that, yeah, maybe she's right. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't know what's going on. The one thing I wanted to do, even though I kind of had lost my confidence and my empowerment feelings after that brief interaction with her, was get an ultrasound. And so I did my best to fight for that and to double down on that. And I finally got a yes, but it was very reluctant. She was like, okay, if you really want an ultrasound, you can get it.
So tell me about the ultrasound.
That I think was the most difficult part of this process, like that itself, and then sort of the aftermath of that. And then also, like, in addition to that, was this could also still be related to stress. So hearing those two things after getting this heavy diagnosis were not reassuring. Even if it was just stress, this wasn't even PCOS. If it was just stress that was making me not have a menstrual cycle, we still should have followed up about that, because if you don't have your menstrual cycle, that's a sign that your body's not, functioning as it should, and you should still look into that. I tried to have my results transferred, and then I learned that my ultrasound results from that occasion were not even saved in the system. Like, it was like as if that visit never happened. And so after that, I was just, I feel like I was kind of spiraling from that. And I was like, they didn't even think it was like important enough to save. And so I feel like that was when I was kind of at my lowest in terms of knowing what to do.
And also this term, just stress, there's no such thing as just stress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It never works to tell someone to relax, first of all. So I don't know what I was supposed to be getting out of that.
So what would you say to someone who has just been diagnosed with PCOS now, or is in the position that you were in some time ago, where has done some reading and is thinking, maybe I have PCOS, but I have to get myself to a doctor? What would you say to a person like that?
I would say you know the most about your own body. I know that it's scary when you go to an office and you're with an expert about medicine, about science, and it can feel like they're the ones with the authority, but you are the only person who knows as much about your body. So just know that. And I think that can hopefully be empowering and give you some confidence. And I also would say to, you've done the research, go with questions and do your best to speak up for yourself. And once you're in that environment, as I even felt, it's really hard to feel like you have any sort of authority. But if you can have some sort of questions or something to guide you or something else to refer to it, I found that really helpful. One thing that really helped me is just talking about it with other people. Like, it just was really important, because I realized that so many of my friends had PCOS and endometriosis. Knowing that other people were going through that, I think really helped me get through the experience, and it helped me feel empowered knowing that other people had the same experience. Yeah.
I think it's just interesting that when these symptoms first start to come up, and we're changing how we think about endometriosis in this way as well, is that this is an adolescent onset condition, which means that your first port of call when these symptoms first start to come up when you're, say, 15 or 16 is your pediatrician. And I've never had a pediatrician on the show, and I don't often think of a pediatrician in the same category as like women's health. But for example, when you were a teenager, to get that first prescription for birth control, that would have had to come from your pediatrician. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. There are so many things to unpack there. One being, it was a piece of cake for me to get birth control, which I think now that's changing. I see it more in sort of the Gen Z, the younger generation, that there is more conversation about what this means because it's not right for everybody. And that was not talked about at all. Like, I wasn't given options. I wasn't told about the side effects, about the mental health issues that can come along with it. And it was so easy for me to get that, but so hard for me to get a diagnosis. So I think that is part of the conversation that needs to be had. It's really hard, especially when you're first going through puberty. It's very normal for people to have irregular periods. This is the case for endometriosis too, where it's like, it's normal to have pain, but for someone who's experiencing a menstrual cycle for the first time, they don't know what the threshold of normal pain is. And so I think that's often why it gets brushed off with endometriosis. So you're like, oh, it's normal to have some menstrual cramping, some pain, but if you're like a child, you don't know what normal is. And you're like, okay, I guess like being in bed for multiple days may be normal. That's what they tell me. And same thing for PCOS. It's like, I'm not getting periods. It's irregular. I guess that's normal. So I think, yes, it's really important to get someone during that transition throughout puberty who can take the time to look into these things more. And I feel like it's hard because pediatricians, they have so much more to do in the same way that like a general practitioner has so much more than menopause. Like, we need more resources at that transition time to capture a lot of these things and to prevent the 10-year delay for diagnosis or the multiple year delay for diagnosis for PCOS.
What do you think is the most overlooked aspect of PCOS? And the part B, which is always a big one as well, is where is that inequality felt most deeply?
It's a great question. I thought a lot about this because it's the whole thing, but I think the most overlooked aspect is just that we really lack nuance. And I think this is true of a lot of women's health disorders and women's health research in general. We treat it as often like one part of the disorder, when in fact it's really this heterogeneous systemic neuroendocrine disorder with many different phenotypes and a lifelong consequence. And we don't know anything about it. We don't know what causes it. We don't know what cures it. I'm a neuroscientist. I think about sort of the mental health and the neural part of it, and we really know nothing.
Well, listen, I'd love to have you come back on the show and tell us more about your results when they come through.
Yes, I would love to. Agreed.
Thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Yes, I had so much fun. This was so great, and I'm a fan of the podcast, so I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks, Elle. Overlooked is here for information and empowerment, but not medical advice. Every person's body is unique, so if you have questions, it is best to speak to your doctor or healthcare provider. We're building a community around women's health so that no one is overlooked. If you'd like to be part of it, hit the follow button on this podcast wherever you're listening to this. Or you can show us some love by writing us a review and sharing this episode with someone. Overlooked is written and created by me, Golda Arthur. Jessica Martinez de Hoz is the show's producer. You can stay up to date with the show by signing up for the newsletter and following us on Instagram and LinkedIn. We read every review and email, so write to us, hello@overlookedpod.com. Thanks for listening.